Hello and welcome to a new idea from the Nutrition Society called Nutrition Chats, where I'm going to sit down over the course of the next couple of years and have regular conversations with some of our members from all over the world in different jobs, different sectors, and just try and get their perspective on their career journey, their thoughts on their particular role in nutrition at the moment, and also how they fit in with the Nutrition Society. So it's my great pleasure to welcome our first guest this evening, because it is the evening here in London, Dr. Emily Prpa. Welcome.
Thank you. Such an honour to be the first guest. Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. So we're going to just rambly talk about anything that we think is of interest. We'll go off in different directions. I think the first thing we'd really be interested in is your kind of career path. Where have you been that's got you to this point at the moment?
Sure. So how far back am I going? As in, when did I study nutrition?
Yeah,
or
let's not go to kindergarten.
Okay.
Let's come forward to. We have been asked, interestingly, by a few people recently, why are we not more engaged at that kind of O-level GCSE, 16 to 18-year-old? So perhaps let's start there. What really inspired you early on?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And it's funny that you bring that up, because I couldn't study nutrition at what I would call, quote, a good university, because my A-levels, I didn't do 2 sciences. So I couldn't actually get into any. So I ended up doing sport and exercise science, and I still, in the back of my head, always wanted to do nutrition. So anytime there was a module that came up around nutrition, I was jumping at it. But then it was when I did my placement year out in Australia at the Institute of Sport in Sydney, where I realised I was so passionate still about nutrition. You know, I was there working a lot, very closely with the physiology department and the biomechanical department, but I just found myself trying to weave into where the dietitians were all the time. So it was after that I came back to finish up my sport and exercise science degree, but I knew that I definitely wanted to study nutrition, so I ended up doing a master's, because at that point, with all the kind of other strings to my bow, not just kind of, I'd only done maths at A-level, didn't even do biology or anything, so I really didn't have enough for nutrition. But yeah, sports science set me up nicely, and then I could transition to a master's, and I did that at King's College London.
Yeah, because there's interesting, a lot of the interns we get in the office, they often come to us at that, what we call that early crossroads. So it's either at the end of their undergraduate or particularly at the end of their master's. What do I do next? Do I stop now? Do I continue to get my PhD? Do I take some time out? So what were your kind of thought process? Now you finished your master's.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind?
To be honest, I think I was a bit of a deer in headlights. So for me, you know, my master's was kind of cramming 4 years into one. I mean, it was very intense, and I kind of came out of it and I was like, oh my goodness, what do I do now? And I felt like a lot of people around me knew what they wanted to do. You know, there was very minimal sort of graduate schemes. I know the Danone one was there. There wasn't much out there to kind of move into industry. Didn't really want to do consultancy, and everyone kept saying, you know, nutrition's great, you can go down all these different directions. But for me, it just made me feel like, oh my goodness, I really don't know what I want to do. So I kind of took a year out. It wasn't really a year out, it was just a year where I worked at Great Ormond Street Hospital in a, not working clinically at all, because I was only a nutritionist, but it gave me just some time to breathe, some money in the bank, and just some time to kind of figure out, okay, what is it that I want to do? So for me, it was that idea that I wasn't quite finished in academia. I wanted to know more still. I really liked when I was doing kind of my final year projects, both in undergrad and in my master's, I was like, I really like this. I like running the clinical trials, this sort of kind of people engagement, and then kind of seeing something all the way through and seeing something that felt like my own project. And I was like, I feel like I could do that. That being said, I still didn't know what a PhD really meant at the time, and I don't think many people do. It's kind of one of those.
All the commitment.
Yeah, and I just remember, and you know, I feel like those 4 years I was constantly trying to defend, I'm not a real student. Like, and you know, my parents would be like, when are you going to get a real job? And I was like, this feels very much like a real job. But yeah, so it was, I ended up doing my PhD back at King's. It was where I felt, you know, kind of comfortable. And my advice for anyone that does do a PhD is to think about those kind of things, because it is a really big deal. And I felt very settled in London. I had a good support system around me, and I think that I'm very grateful that I had that, and I didn't move to a new city to do my PhD.
That support system is critical, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
For me personally, I shouldn't pick up that. For me personally, it really was. So my PhD, I didn't really enjoy it, and I know that a lot of people often come out and they have great stories about their PhD, and mine really wasn't that. It wasn't a love affair by any means for me.
Means to an end, yes.
Kind of, yeah. I always saw it as maybe this springboard, because in that year where I was at Great Ormond Street, when I was looking at jobs, a lot of what I saw was kind of like requires a PhD, because I always kind of knew I wanted to move into industry. And that was kind of my emerald gates, and anything that I looked at, bear in mind what I thought was moving into industry. I thought there were like 4 jobs available, like the nutritionist at Tesco, the nutritionist at Asda, M&S or whatever. So when I was Googling them, PhD desirable, and we all know what that means, pretty much they require it. So that was kind of the reason why I took on the PhD. And if I'm honest, I think if I was somewhere else and I wasn't kind of at home where, London, my parents half an hour away and this kind of thing, I do think I probably would have quit at a point in my life, because I found a lot of people don't really maybe talk about kind of what a PhD entails. And I did find it incredibly tough. It is your baby and it's only you really working on it. That was the nature of my study. I wasn't working with a postdoc or anything. And I really did find that, I was young in my 20s, and I did find that really tough. And we don't kind of talk about maybe quitting. And I think if I'd maybe spoken about it more, there was just kind of this like, well, you've set out to do it now and you just do it. And I'm really grateful I did stick out it. And the only reason I think I did was because I kind of fell in love with science communications. And I realized that that's what I love doing. It's not necessarily the research, but it's the communicating the research. And I was like, bingo. Yeah. So from that was when I started, I guess, just looking beyond what my PhD was and the opportunities that it does give you. And I think...
So was that, sorry to interrupt you, but was that the motivating factor? Because you said you weren't that inspired and you were finding it difficult. When we're in those moments, something, it's the resilience piece, something keeps us going. Was it that light bulb moment that you thought, I can see what I can do with this?
Yeah, I think so. I think I realized it was... I realized I was just, whenever there was an opportunity to present sort of within the department, I was like, yeah, I'm free, yeah, I can do that. And, the feedback I was getting was, you have a very natural flair for presenting. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that. I love it. People are like, why don't you get nervous? And I was like, no, I jump at those opportunities. And I hadn't realized that was, what other people wouldn't consider normal sort of thing.
So you didn't think of it, you said you were attracted to industry very early on. Why not the media? Because if you're very comfortable behind in front of a camera or in front of a crowd, that's quite unusual. I mean, I've been to the postgrad conferences where they're absolutely terrified of speaking in public. Rare you meet somebody who is naturally comfortable with that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I never really thought about that career. And it's funny that you say that, because during my quote PhD crisis, which apparently are a thing kind of second, third year where people do really consider quitting, I went to see a careers advisor. And it was over that time that I'd already sort of started looking at science communications, and I'd entered competitions and things. And this career advisor had seen me at one of the competitions, and he was like, would you ever consider sort of media? And I was like, no. I was like, I'm a scientist. Like, absolutely not. I just think that it just wasn't something that I'd ever really thought of. And to be honest, I just didn't know how you would ever get into that. And yeah, I don't know. And I think, yeah, I don't know how to.
So how would you describe yourself? Now, if somebody said to you, what do? Do you say you are a science communicator, or do you say you are a nutrition scientist?
A bit of both, if I'm honest. Yeah, I think I realized I had a skill that I could own during my PhD, and I took every opportunity to do that. So now I think that's what I consider my bread and butter. I think for a long time I was a bit like, oh, what's my vehicle? As a nutritionist, so many of us, we all, and I think that's why we all get on, we all have one mission, and it's kind of to promote health through nutrition, and we all have our strengths. And I think I realized that I was so sort of fixated on, okay, so what's the vehicle? Is it going into policy? Is it going into industry? You know, all of these things. And a lot of the time, the vehicle is what skills you can bring to any situation or any role, be it in policy or whatever. And it's, you know, during your PhD, a lot of people are doing it in their 20s, or when they're coming out of their masters, people are still figuring out who they are, let alone like if they've got this checklist for their career. And I think a lot of the time, even now, I get kind of worried or nervous that I'm not progressing quick enough in my career and this type of thing. And I was obsessed with what my job title was going to be, especially coming out of university, and especially when it was my PhD. I was there like, okay, here we go. I'm going to go and save the world, and you know, I'm going to be head of XYZ. And I ended up being an intern, and I was like, what? Like, what? That's not how this was meant to, you know, play out. I'd taken on the PhD to springboard me into something where I felt like, you know, very much a boss, and I absolutely didn't. I don't know where I've segued now, but coming back, yeah. So the big thing I would say, like in terms of advice, when you're in those moments of like, nutrition's great because there's so many avenues you can go down, but at the same time that could be incredibly daunting because you're like, well, which one do I choose? I think taking the pressure off yourself in those for that first job and just getting it under your belt, like it's just one of those things.
I tell lots of people that the people think their career is just a straight line. It's going to be lovely, but it isn't. You wave all over the place. You have to go backwards sometimes to get forward. There's nothing wrong with just plunging in and trying something.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's called the squiggly career or something, which I think nutrition is the best
CV.
thing. Yeah,
the squiggly CV.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's a new thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, I think you know, we might have friends who are like lawyers or doctors, and you know, they've got a very much chronological stepwise process, and that is not the case for nutrition. And I think that's the best thing. But sometimes very early on, it can be really very much like, you know, which way do I go?
I need a job.
Yeah,
I need a job now.
Yeah.
And the panic sets in.
And I think that there is this kind of sort of pressure to, you know, in terms of sometimes in your career where you make big choices, you know, coming out of academia, especially for me coming out of my PhD, and I knew very early on that I didn't want a career in academia, but there is still this kind of unspoken bias maybe of when you are in academia or even in your masters or whatever that may be, is to continue on in academia. And I think that we need to start normalizing, particularly at the PhD level, careers outside of academia, because you don't often get that kind of informational support within universities when it comes to kind of PhD students particularly. Well, that was my experience. And I think that, that if we could create more of this sort of fluidity between sectors sometimes, you know, it's like, oh, I'm an industry nutritionist. And I'm like, okay, yes, I am. But I hope one day, you know, maybe I can go back into academia. You know, we see a lot of academics coming out of industry. We never see industry nutritionists really going back in academia. And I think that that's sometimes, yes, these certain biases that maybe we're not bringing to light and saying that are there, which I think we all know are there within our field.
I went to a talk recently in Ireland at the postgrad conference where somebody presented the by euro the amount of money that goes into research, and showed that the research money in industry, in the private sector, overwhelms anything that goes on in publicly funded research. R&D is a huge piece. I mean, you're now in industry, and we'll move on to that in a moment. But that's where they were trying to say that's where you should follow the money, if I can use that old quote.
I think, you know, there's so much talk around industry funded research, or okay, that study is more credible because it's not industry funded. And I think sometimes, you know, unfortunately, industry is where the money is. You know, for us to do the science that we need to do, industry have it. But also, I think sometimes, you know, we get bogged down in those sorts of details when actually let's just look at the science. Let's critique that. Let's not look at, you know, is that conducted well enough? That's where scientific integrity is, you know, and if research is being done properly, you know, by third parties and industry are funding it, they shouldn't have any say in what's going on anyway. So yeah, I think funding is a tricky one. You know, we'd, as academics, you know, ask any academic, they'd always want the public sector funding, but that is incredibly difficult to get. And a lot of the time, industry are their sort of oxygen. You know, they're under immense pressure to publish, to get grants, and this type of thing. And industry are there. They want the research being done. So
and now I've heard that a number of funders of research are looking for a partnership that goes beyond the academic institute. They're expecting other partners to be around the table. I get letters all the time now saying, will you sign up and support our bid as one of those external partners? So I think the landscape is definitely changing.
Yeah, but it's interesting you say that, because I think when we look at funding pathways and we're trying to create more of a collaborative approach with any sort of research that's going on in the scientific field, still though there are publication biases that we know of. You know, journal articles that aren't being published because there's an industry scientist on the paper. That to me just doesn't make sense, because like you say, the amount of funding, even, you know, public funding that is based on, you know, the grant application process is based on the actual application of the science, and you actually require industry interest in that research. So to me, the two things aren't adding up, you know, and I think we need to better align this and get rid of this sort of shaming of industry sometimes in this space. And I think it's more and more difficult to do.
Yeah, and some years and years ago, I mean, this society, we've been around for 82 years. Somewhere in the mission statement, it's the research and application of nutrition science. That's been there for decades. This is nothing new. We've perhaps just lost that emphasis of that message over the years.
Definitely. As an industry scientist, you know, it's very easy for me to go, okay, I work at Yakult, wear that hat, disclose that conflict of interest. But, you know, so many academics will take a travel grant from X, and then, you know, they'll be speaking at, you know, Y conference, and none of that's being disclosed in certain conflict of interest areas. So I think that, yeah, there's a difficulty here in that, you know, we can keep industry out as much as we want in a certain extent, but I think that it's merging more and more. And yeah, I think it's difficult now to sometimes piece together who is who and who are they representing at a certain point. I'd say that's a big challenge within kind of nutrition research at the moment, because my big fear is that with this type of thing, that particularly kind of with the pressures of academics to publish, a lot of the time what gets grants and publications are the very niche, cool, shove the words gut microbiome in there, or personalized nutrition, and that's what's really picking up in the media. But really, when we look at dietary guidelines, you know, clinical practice, and kind of if we want to start looking at kind of health inequalities and really addressing them, what we need is really very much boring research, everyone doing the same thing, multi-center stuff that no one wants to do anymore because it's not getting the grants, it's not getting the funding. And I really worry that, you know, we need to start realizing, are we going off piste here and getting back to really core fundamental nutrition research sometimes? So as exciting as that space is, we don't want to lose kind of what we have established so much as a community.
Yeah, remember the basics. That's a lesson in any sector, in any life.
Yeah.
So next year, 2024, we are going to introduce a nutrition Congress-style conference to replace our big summer meeting. And the idea is we take what we learned from the FENS conference when we host it, where we have parallel sessions, and we open up, we put a core program together, and then we open up slots on the program for partners, for industry, for non-profit foundations, for academic institutions to bid and deliver symposiums. So it's a very different approach for us. I'm interested on your thoughts on that from the private sector perspective, coming into what has always been traditionally a very academic space.
I think it's very exciting, obviously, for us. I think it's something that will be great. I think as well, like, you know, the types of people that come to Nutrition Society are I don't know, but from what I've engaged with, aren't always academics. And actually now it might facilitate even greater discussions. And I think it goes back to that, okay, it's amazing, we can have all of this science and this is great, but how do we apply it? And hopefully that setting will allow us to be like, oh, you know, we can link up with this company and start creating something here, and this type of thing. And
interesting. I hadn't thought of that. It could actually become like a collaborative space, 2-3 days a year, where anybody can come along, because there should be something for everybody. I think that's our ambition. So you won't want to go to every session, and then we will have parallel sessions, which we've been very reluctant to do for a long time. So you get choice. Wow, a whole new world.
I think it's going to be great. I'm really excited about that, and yeah, hopefully it will bring out that kind of collaborative approach. I heard something the other day. I'm not a massive fan of portmanteaus, but it was collaboration. And because we all talk about collaboration and we all sit on this, but then does anything really ever come from it? And I was like, you know, that's actually really true. We can all talk about collaboration and have these lovely discussions, but actually, is there any kind of follow through with this? So yeah, hopefully we'll see.
Action this day, as somebody once said. Our other venture is the Academy, which we've kind of softly launched this year. It's a subscription model. So we've taken the success of all the webinars that became very popular during COVID, and built them into a catalogue. And the idea is that we'll build up themes and strands of activity, and early career researchers will be able to take part. We'll have some great names from across the world filling this space. And instead of a pay as you go at 14, 15, 20 pounds for a 40-minute webinar for a small fee, you get everything. You won't want everything. As somebody who I think would probably enjoy delivering a webinar as well as watching them, what do you think of that as a concept? Nobody else is doing that in the world at the moment, so we're kind of excited. We've found a new space to play in, because it's global. You could produce a webinar for us, and we could launch that all over the world.
Sign me up. It sounds great. I think the concept of it is awesome. Like you say, you know, you might not want everything in there, but I mean, that's the way the whole world is going, right? It's from anything, I guess it sounds like it's like Netflix, but for nutrition. So yeah, it sounds like you guys have hit the money, or on the money at that point. It's another string to your bow. So yeah.
That's an interesting analogy, Netflix for nutrition. I think we'll use that. But sneakily use that, because it is, isn't it? If you go into Netflix, I mean, there's so much content in there, you'd never want to see most of it. But for a small fee, there is your particular niche, and it grows and grows and grows. And each month there's new content added. So that's a good analogy.
That's perfect.
Thank you very much.
I'll sign up now.
Thank you. I got very frustrated with the ENLP, because there's only about 20 or 30 slots a year. And how many hundreds of people could we potentially put through it? Because leadership can transform. And I'm just curious, on your, early in your career now, do you feel you've had enough exposure to the concept of leadership? And if not, where would you, from where you are in Yakult, where would you go to get either experience or training?
That's a great question. So I would say if I hadn't have done ENLP, so the European Nutrition Leadership Program, I probably wouldn't have had absolutely any. And I think that's such a shame, because that journey of leadership is so fundamental from the absolute beginning. And I think everyone has a leader, and you can be a leader from day dot, really. I think as someone who has, I guess I've always had that kind of stereotypical leadership qualities. I've always found myself in those roles, even at team building exercises, because I'm, confident, spoken and things. But, my leadership journey as such to date has actually almost been softening that side and realizing that,
softening. I've not heard that in the leadership.
Yeah. I think that, recognizing more of what the other styles of leadership are. And I think that I've become somewhat more vulnerable I'm very much someone that puts on a big brave face a lot of the time, and I lead by example and this kind of thing, and everything's fine. And actually a lot comes from recognizing my own sort of limitations and setting my own boundaries, and that idea of kind of putting on your own oxygen mask before you can kind of help someone else. And I realized, you know, and I'm grateful that I've had those opportunities to develop and continue to do that. That being said, within Yakult, I don't have a nutritionist above me at all. And it's something that I worried about taking the job, because I'm a huge believer in, you know, you're the product of the people around you. And I am so grateful to be in a career where I adore every nutritionist I've ever met. And that's how I know I'm in the right career. But I think that not having that sort of mentor at that level was something that made me think about taking the job. But I think because I have a network of people that I can reach out to, that it made me more confident that I was still making the right career move, because I can get that from elsewhere. And I just asked someone else to be my mentor, basically. But I say, you know, at the beginning of your career, and without that any kind of leadership program or anything, that can be really difficult to know where to look or what to do. So please, Mark, bring something to the table.
Well, there's now a Middle Eastern nutrition leadership program.
I saw that.
I joined the faculty of that and the academic advisory board. We got that off the ground last year. And this year they've just been accredited by the Institute of Leadership and Management, which is a huge step forward for them just from a credibility point of view. But again, they've only got capacity for 20 odd people a year. But if we've got now people in the Middle East, there's an African one. I've spoken at the Chinese Nutrition Leadership Program. We've got the European one. We're wondering whether there is, coming down from that, is there an online opportunity, perhaps through the Academy, to have an introduction to leadership, just a online course, perhaps a weekend residential somewhere in there, or a one-day get-together. But just get people the basics, tick that box, and that leads you into ENLP, because leadership is not for everybody. Some people try and think, oh gosh, no, I don't like that. Because some of it is acting, as you probably know.
But I think there's so many different ways of being a leader, and there's I think there's a quiet leader in everyone. They just don't know it a lot of the time. And sometimes even just, you know, European Nutrition Leadership Program, the amount of people that felt like, oh my goodness, why am I here, when I met them on it, you know, I was still thinking that. I was like, at one point, people are really going to find me out, you know, it's all smoke and mirrors. And it's funny, I think so many people probably hear the word leadership and they're like, well, I'm not a leader. And you see people go on these kind of journeys themselves, realizing that there are so many other ways to be a leader. I think there's this thing that, you know, if someone's up dancing, it's not that first person, it's the second person that matters. And sometimes that second person is kind of like the co-leader. That's what then joins the huge army, because people feel more confident to go up to the dance floor at that point, you know. So I think that those are the leaders as well that we so need, and maybe they're the ones that feel not so confident to maybe even apply to some of these leadership programs. So if there was something, like you say, virtual, doing the comfort of your own home, like
just
dip
get over
your toe.
the basics. We spoke about that earlier, just building that confidence level to take the next step. Because to me, leadership is about serving, and not everybody approaches it that way. But serving others, if that becomes your mission, then actually that's where mentoring then comes in. That's where empowerment comes in. All of those good words, but you've got to come from a position of being confident enough to say, it's not about me. It's about the people, the team around me. I was at the FDF dinner last night, and Amy beside me from the FDF said, what's the best part of your job? I thought about it for ages. And I said, actually, it's the people I work with. It's the team. It's like an extended family. And she went, oh, it's not like that at FDF. Probably need to edit that. She said, well, we don't kind of have that approach because there's 70 of us. You've only got 12. So that's why it probably feels like that. But in your department, you probably have a team. You just need to approach it differently. You know, a different mindset of collectiveness, of mutual respect, and all of those kind of things, which brings us right back to the beginning that we spoke about, with that engagement beyond just the pure research of the science, the application of it, the different sectors involved, different people involved, the consultants, the industry. That's a place of being humble if you can cross that road and think, I just want to engage with people and seek to understand them.
I completely agree.
And then we're off and running. I hope.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Sounds simple. Let's do it.
It does. What a great way to end the conversation.
Yeah.
We're on a high, a spiritual
Yeah.
high of how we're going to solve all these problems. Emily,
That's
it's been
great.
great. Thank you
I've
so much for
absolutely
coming in.
loved it. Thank
And
you.
thank you.
I have my champagne now.
That's the treat waiting for you.